Welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm François Picard. He's a career diplomat called back to lead the State Department's Africa department for Donald Trump's administration. Our guest in the France 24 interview, Assistant U.S. Secretary of State Tibor Nagy. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks very much for having me.
You're in Paris at the outset of a 2-week tour of Central Africa, your third tour of the continent since you were named last year. 2018 saw surprise change in places like Zimbabwe, Angola, your old stomping ground, Ethiopia.
Sure.
2019, what do you make of the street protests we're seeing in Algeria and Sudan?
Well, I can talk about Sudan. I think for Sudan, for the Bashir government, it's probably the greatest existential threat that they've had probably since coming to power. These started out, of course, economic protests that evolved fairly quickly into a political protest. And the folks on the street are doing it fairly reasonably, not showing a lot of violence. Unfortunately, the regime in response has been overly violent. And it sounds like the protesters, their big aim is they want Bashir gone.
And the irony is that the U.S. lifted sanctions on Sudan.
Yeah, that was a different process. That had to do with other things besides what's happening with these demonstrations. And I think people know that we're also continuing a dialogue with Sudan to try to eventually get to the point where we can end their state sponsor of terrorism. These demonstrations are obviously having a very negative effect on those discussions.
Omar al-Bashir's been there since 1989. Yeah. Is he still the man to lead Sudan?
That's up to the Sudanese to decide. From our point of view, that should be up to the Sudanese people. The Constitution, the way it's written, he cannot run for president again. Elections will be coming up in 2020. Like I said, that's up to the Sudanese people.
And if he changes that Constitution?
That would be very problematic.
Again, in Sudan, like in Algeria, we're seeing a young population, which a lot of the people in the streets, and we're seeing it in Algeria this week, they've only known one president.
You make a great point. We have a situation in Africa especially where the average population is probably 4 times or 3 times younger than some of the leaders. And there's a disconnect between the elders, some of them who've been there through until the liberation struggle, and the young populations that want the exact same things out of life that young people everywhere want, thanks to the internet, international communication, and they are going to be frustrated if they don't get it.
The U.S.'s National Security Advisor, John Bolton, last December, he gives a speech outlining the Trump administration's Africa policy. In it, he obviously shows a good knowledge of the African continent, but the speech, heavy on the words China and Russia, it didn't seem to offer much in terms of a positive view on how to engage more with the African continent.
Actually, I think people have been focused on the words China and Russia, but if they read through the speech, what you see are some very focused goals on increasing trade and investment with Africa, partnering with Africa to address the threats coming from terrorism or from pandemics, using the best of U.S. taxpayer dollars to help those regimes and countries that are ready to work with us to advance the causes of their own people. So, those words, China and Russia, jump out, but the thrust and the focus, it's exactly the type of Africa policy I've been wanting to see since I first got into Africa in 1978. I'm very, very comfortable with it. I really believe it addresses the needs that Africa has right now for this century, with its millions and millions of new young people.
The best of taxpayer dollars, you say. Bolton hailing Donald Trump's transactional view of the world. Isn't that just what China is doing as well?
Not really, because with China, there's very little focus, if any, on things like good governance, democracy, human rights. Also on outcomes. Look at some of the indebtedness that some of these African countries now are suffering as a result of some of the deals they have signed with China. Countries are sovereign. They can sign whatever deals they want to sign. But at the end of the day, they have to look at when this bridge or this airport is built, how many millions or billions of dollars are we going to owe to China, and how are we going to pay for that? And oh, by the way, how much technology is transferred? How many of our young people are hired as workers?
He talked in his speech about Russia trying to increase its influence in the region through corrupt economic dealings. Was he talking about the Central African Republic?
That would possibly be an ideal candidate with the very non-transparent deals that are going on with Russia there. And what are they really up to? What are they doing? We all want to support peace in the Central African Republic. We want to do it through the mechanism in place, which is the Africa Union's process. Things that are being done behind the curtain, we tend to be very suspicious.
So what is Russia's game there?
Ask them.
Your trip now, you're going to be going to the DR Congo, and
right.
there has been a change of sorts.
Yes.
Joseph Kabila was unable to stand, but it's still his people who control the National Assembly, the Senate, the military. And when you go there, when you speak to Etienne Tshisekedi, will you get
Felix
Tshisekedi? Excuse me, Etienne was his late father. When you speak with the new president, will he be the man in charge?
Well, here's the deal. First democratic election transfer of power in any Central African country. So I think that was very significant. Main goal, Kabila goes away, met. Felix Tshisekedi, brand new president, starting out, vestiges of the old system still around him. As you say, Kabila's
more than vestiges.
Party. Well, here's the deal, though. Kabila's party in the National Assembly is a coalition. And as we all know, when there are transfers of power, all types of political dynamics start happening in the background. For the Westerners, it's very difficult to fully evaluate what all is happening in the political process there. As I said, it's undergoing. There are very significant political figures in the Congo that were outside of the country who will be coming back in. Lots of going into this democratic and electoral mix going forward. If you remember, in Angola, not too long ago, there was a transfer of power. And everybody said that President Lourenço would still be on the leash of the former president. And look at the incredible changes that have taken place there over time. So I would say, let's give it a chance. Let's look back a year and a half from now and see what's happened between now and then.
The United States seems to be helping destiny along, though, with the announcement of sanctions against 5 important figures. That was announced on February the 22nd.
Right.
They include the president of the National Electoral Commission.
Exactly.
So you're saying effectively the election was a sham. The guy who won wasn't the one who came out of the ballot box, and yet you're giving a rousing endorsement to the new president.
Here's what we are saying. We're not saying the elections were a sham in that millions of Congolese went out to vote in good faith. The candidates who are running, what happened in the background with the Electoral Commission is not their fault because they were running in good faith. But at the end of the day, we said all along that those people who interfere with the democratic process, or if they're endorsing violence or for corruption, we are going to sanction them. So as far as I'm concerned, this was very much a 2-track policy. On the one hand, we are definitely going to work with the President Tshisekedi. On the other hand, the people who were trying to impede the democratic process, there's a price to be paid, which we said all along in our declarations. This was the first set of sanctions. Stay tuned because there are more to come.
Against who?
You will see when the names come
You already
out.
have the Speaker of the National Assembly, the President of the Constitutional Court.
There are more sanctions which will be forthcoming.
The inner circle of Kabila?
No comment.
Okay. You're also going to Cameroon, which you know well. You were posted there. You were posted there in the early 90s.
Yes.
I come back to the question at the outset. Did you think that Paul Biya would still be the president in 2019?
Wow. At the time, the way the election that I observed back in 1991 went, the possibility was certainly there. He has been in charge of Cameroon, I think, longer now than I believe any other serving African head of state. Maybe Obiang, but I think definitely there. The problem is, with such long service, so many fundamental problems have gone unaddressed. And we see this now in the northwest, southwest, or what some people call the Anglophone region of Cameroon. In addition, Cameroon has two very serious problems. One is in the north with Boko Haram, ISIS, West Africa. And in that part of it, we are working very closely with the Cameroonians as allies to address the problem of terrorism. The more fundamental problem, and in my view, the more existential problem for Cameroon is what's going on in the Anglophone region. The government has been totally, in my view, ineffective in addressing that. Some of their actions have actually worsened what is going on there. There's been just a mounting cycle of violence from both sides. The radicals in the northwest, the ones who call themselves the Ambo Boys, and then the security forces. We've had horrendous loss of life, casualties. I think October, November, December of last year were the three highest. Now it's somewhat decreased. The great majority of the casualties are those on the Anglophone side. The Cameroon government is just not being proactive in addressing this problem.
And will you be meeting with President Biya?
I certainly hope so. We have asked that. Of course, it's up to the Cameroon government as to who I meet with.
And will you be asking for the release of Maurice Kamto, the presidential candidate?
I will. I will. I think that would be a very positive gesture. There are a number of, I think, gestures the Cameroon government could do immediately, which would start to diffuse the problem. But at the end of the day, it's going to require dialogue, open dialogue, no conditions dialogue to get to the heart of the problems.
U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Tibor Nagy, many thanks for joining us here in the France 24.
Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you for being with us.